All right, well, hello everybody. I'm coming to you from Hettinger, North Dakota at the Hettinger Research Extension Center, and I've been asked to talk about fly control for grazing cattle. So those of us up here in the northern Great Plains have had a long, drawn-out winter, and we're appreciating some warmer weather and hopefully some rain, but with that comes some fly population issues, and they can have negative impacts on cattle performance. So now's a good time for you to kind of sit down and think about what you've done in the past and how you might manage that a little bit better this summer. So first of all, why is fly control important? Well, flies are huge irritants to cattle. Obviously, we've all seen the impacts they can have on behavior where cattle are bunching up in the corners of the pastures, trying to get rid of the pests, standing in water, seeking out shade. So all those behavior changes leads to reduced grazing time, which can have impacts on performance. So we might see some weight loss issues, decreased milk production, which can have impacts on calf performance, those type of things. Also, there are several fly species that are indicated for disease transmission, such as pink eye and summer mastitis. So together, the production and control costs are estimated at $1.5 billion industry-wide, or about $30 to $50 per head. So obviously, control is going to be necessary in a lot of situations. So the first fly I'm going to talk about is horn flies. These are one of the most economically damaging pests, with losses in production and control costs exceeding $780 million in the U.S. alone. These are going to be found on the back and sides of the animal, and sometimes under the belly in warm weather. You may not be able to see the individual flies well in this picture, but there's more than enough on this cow to warrant treatment, and I'll talk a little bit about how you might be able to estimate your fly populations in a minute. So the horn fly is about half the size of a housefly. You might note the mouth parts that are extending from the fly in the picture. So they use these piercing mouth parts to puncture the skin of the animals and suck their blood, often consuming between 30 and 40 blood meals per day. So depending on your fly populations, you might be looking at thousands of blood meals per animal. The economic threshold is where we consider the injury level equal to the cost of treatment. So for horn flies, we're talking about 200 flies per animal. And one easy way to estimate the fly populations is by just taking a digital photograph of both sides of the animal and then enlarging that on your computer and getting some estimates of fly counts. The females will lay their eggs in fresh manure, and the larvae will develop within that manure pat. The life cycle is completed within 10 to 20 days from egg to adult. So we're dealing with multiple populations of flies every summer, typically with populations peaking in late summer. So dust bags and oilers are some good control options. You're going to get the best control when you're in a forced use situation around a water tank. Obviously not always possible in a grazing situation. Insecticide ear tags and strips. There's some research out in Nebraska showing reductions of approximately 90% of the horn fly population when you use the ear tags and strips together. And those strips just attach to an existing ear tag. We do have some resistance in horn flies to the pyrethroid class of insecticides, so it's really important to rotate those classes yearly. You've got lots of options. There's organophosphates, combination tags, or avamectin. And I'll show you a publication where you can kind of get a good handle on all the options that are available towards the end of the presentation here. I think one mistake that we frequently make is tagging fairly early in the season before we're kicking calves out to grass. So because those populations peak in mid to late summer, and you're only going to get 3 to 4 weeks of control with an ear tag, it's really important not to tag prior to June 1st. Obviously that will change depending on where you're at, but just know when those populations peak and try not to tag too early. If horn flies are your only issue, there really is no need to tag calves. The flies tend to concentrate on the mature animals, so no need to take that expense and tag your calves. We've also got a variety of other options, sprays, pour-ons. There's a compressed air gun that delivers an individual dose of insecticide to each animal. Really important to get complete coverage with all these options. And again, your control is going to be limited to a couple weeks, so you're going to need to reapply. There's also a number of people that are using an insecticide that's incorporated into their mineral supplement. This will kill the larvae that develop in the manure paths. So it's going through the animal, and that's present in the manure, and then when flies lay their eggs in there, the larvae are eliminated. These can be used as part of your fly control program, but obviously it's not going to take care of everything. We know that not all animals consume mineral. And also some of these flies can migrate up to about 10 miles. So if your neighbor's not taking care of their fly problems, you're going to have migration coming in from other herds. Okay, moving on to the face fly. These flies are larger and darker than a house fly. They cluster and they feed on secretions from the eyes, nose, and mouth of livestock. So although they don't bite, they have little spines that cover their mouth parts, and they use these to irritate the eye and cause a production of tears, which are rich in proteins, which is their primary food source. So this eye injury can then predispose animals to infection by the pink eye bacterium, which is Moraxella bovis or M. bovis. Face flies can also vector the bovine herpes virus 1, which is a causative agent of infectious bovine rhinotracheitis or IBR. So lots of disease issues with the face fly. And because they're such an irritant, we consider 20 flies a heavy infestation, and that would be the economic threshold for treatment. Again, the face flies will develop in manure paths, and their entire life cycle is completed within 2 to 3 weeks. Again, dealing with multiple populations per summer. And these are going to be more common in your high rainfall or high water areas. They kind of prefer those areas. So control on these pests is kind of more challenging than horn flies because they do spend a lot of time off the animal. They only return to feed. Dust bags and oilers are effective because they're out there and the animal can use them on a consistent basis. There are also obviously insecticide ear tags and strips. However, unlike the horn flies, you're going to need to treat both the cows and the calves if you have a face fly issue. And then another consideration is to think about a pink eye vaccine if you've had face fly problems in the past and you know they're probably going to be an issue again. And that can either be a commercial pink eye vaccine or an autogenous one that's developed by the vet in your area just based on the most common type of pink eye strain. And the last fly I'm going to talk about today is the stable fly. So this one is about the size of a house fly. It is, again, like the horn fly, a blood feeder. However, it's found mostly on the front legs. And the bites from these stable flies are extremely painful, and you'll see cattle reacting by stomping their legs, bunching up in the corners, or standing in water to try to get rid of the flies. And so the economic threshold for this fly is very low, 5 flies per leg. So literally, if you see any stable flies, you're going to want to think about control. The eggs for this fly are deposited in decaying organic matter. So any place where you have a mixture of manure and some fermenting feed, rotting hay, feedlots, compost areas, any place where you might have fed hay during the winter, those are all common breeding grounds for stable flies. And the Ag Research Service estimates that stable flies cost the U.S. cattle industry more than $2.4 billion a year. And this is primarily through lowered milk production on dairies because obviously dairies have a lot of feed around. There's manure and compost piles, and so lowered milk production, and then also reduced weight gains and feed efficiency in the beef industry. So this is a very economically damaging pest. You have it. This one, I think these have just increased in difficulty for control as I've gone through them. This one is really challenging. Really not a lot of options with insecticides. The sprays are the best option. And again, you know, that's some initial fees to get started with the equipment, with your low pressure sprayer or mist sprayer. And then obviously repeated application costs. So experts kind of recommend the best way to reduce your populations is just by sanitation, cleaning up the feed grounds, spreading out the manure and drying it down. It's really difficult for the fly larvae to develop if that manure is spread out and dried down. And that goes for all the flies that I've discussed today. So something to think about. There's also some larvicide options that are available for stable flies that you can treat, you know, barns and feeding areas and things with that. Try to prevent the larval development. So the bottom line, you need to understand what type of pest you're dealing with, figuring out what your best control options are, and then following the label directions to make sure you're getting the best control and reducing the chance of resistance in those fly populations. The University of Nebraska has a really good description of the various products that are available for fly control, and they go through by different species and different class of insecticide. So check that out at the link on the screen there, and best of luck with your fly control this summer.